What would you do if your four-legged best friend discovered something that could change the fate of everyone around you? In a sleepy little town, a young man and his dog are about to uncover a mystery that will shake the foundations of everything they know. Get ready for a story full of twists and turns that will leave you breathless until the end. What could this loyal companion have discovered? But before we begin, if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, and leave a like to support our work. Jack slowly opened his eyes, feeling the sun's rays streaming through the bedroom window. He stretched and glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 6:30 a.m. A smile formed on his lips as he heard the soft scratching at the door. It was Max, his 3-year-old Labrador, eager to start another day of adventures. "I'm coming, buddy," Jack said, jumping out of bed and opening the door. Max burst in like a golden whirlwind, wagging his tail and licking his owner's face enthusiastically. Jack laughed, patting the dog's soft ears. "Ready for our walk?" As he dressed in comfortable hiking clothes, Jack looked out the window. The sky was clear, promising a perfect day to explore the mountains surrounding the small town they lived in. He and Max took these hikes almost every day, but today something in the air felt different, as if the wind itself whispered, "Secrets." After a quick breakfast, the two set off from the house. The streets were still quiet, with only a few early risers starting their routines. Jack waved to Mr. Peterson, who was watering his garden flowers, and to Mrs. Thompson, who was heading out for her morning jog. Arriving at the base of the mountain, Jack let Max off his leash, as he always did. The Labrador knew the path well and never strayed far. They began climbing the familiar trail, with Max running ahead, sniffing bushes and barking cheerfully at distant squirrels. As they advanced, Jack noticed that Max seemed more agitated than usual. The dog stopped frequently, looking back as if to make sure Jack was following. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked, intrigued by his companion's unusual behavior. Suddenly, Max dashed off the trail into a denser area of the forest. "Max, come back here!" Jack shouted, surprised. He hesitated for a moment before following the dog. He had never seen Max disobey like this before. Pushing through bushes and ducking under low branches, Jack tried to keep up with Max's pace. His heart was pounding, not just from the physical exertion, but also from the apprehension that was beginning to build. After a few minutes of chasing, he finally caught up to Max, who was standing in front of a rock formation. Jack looked around, realizing they were in a part of the mountain he had never explored before. The trees here were older and denser, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. "Max, what did you find?" he murmured, approaching cautiously. Then he saw it. Partially hidden by vegetation and shadows, there was an opening in the rock. A cave. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. How had he never noticed this before? The entrance was small, but it seemed to widen as it led into the mountain. Max began barking insistently, looking from the cave to Jack and back to the cave again. His barks echoed strangely, as if the mountain itself was responding. Jack stepped closer, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Easy, boy," he said, trying to calm Max. But the dog remained agitated, even lightly tugging on Jack's pant leg as if trying to pull him into the cave. Jack hesitated. Part of him wanted to turn around and go back to the safety of the known trail. But another part, the part that always drove him to explore and seek out adventures, was fascinated. What could be inside that cave that had Max so worked up? Pulling his phone from his pocket, Jack turned on the flashlight. The beam of light illuminated the cave entrance, revealing damp, rocky walls and an uneven floor. He took a step forward, feeling the cool, damp air emanating from within. "Okay, Max," Jack said, his voice trembling slightly. "Let's see what you've found." With his heart pounding, and Max sticking close to his heels, Jack entered the cave. The sounds of the forest faded behind them, replaced by the echo of their footsteps and Max's heavy breathing. With each step, the darkness seemed to swallow them more. As they moved deeper, Jack noticed that the cave floor wasn't entirely natural. There were flatter areas, as if they had been leveled by human hands. This intrigued him even more. Someone had been here before. Suddenly, Max stopped, his ears pricked up, alert. Jack shone the flashlight towards where the dog was looking, and froze. On the cave floor, partially covered by dust and small stones, lay an object that clearly didn't belong there. Jack crouched down slowly, his heart pounding, echoing in the cave's silence. With trembling hands, he picked up the object, a modern flashlight, dusty but still functional. "Someone's been here recently," he murmured, looking at Max, who remained on high alert. Turning the flashlight over in his hands, Jack noticed deep scratches on the metal. How strange, he thought, frowning. The scratches seemed to form a pattern, almost like symbols. He tried to decipher them, but they didn't make any sense. Max suddenly barked, making Jack jump. The sound echoed through the cave, amplifying eerily. "Shh, boy," Jack whispered, petting the Labrador's fur to calm him. But Max seemed restless, staring intently into the depths of the cave. Driven by curiosity and Max's agitation, Jack decided to move forward. The cave widened as they progressed, revealing fascinating rock formations. The air grew colder and damper, and Jack could hear the distant sound of dripping water. After a few minutes of careful walking, they reached a fork in the path. Two tunnels stretched into the darkness, both equally mysterious. "Which way, Max?" Jack asked, half joking. To his surprise, Max immediately headed for the right tunnel, looking back as if calling Jack to follow. The right tunnel was narrower, forcing Jack to stoop slightly. The walls here seemed smoother, almost as if they had been artificially carved. The feeling that something was wrong grew with each step. Suddenly, Max stopped again, ears pricked up. Jack pointed the flashlight ahead and his heart nearly stopped. In front of them, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. And this chamber wasn't empty. Improvised tables filled the space, covered with papers, maps, and electronic equipment. On the walls, whiteboards were filled with notes and complex diagrams. In one corner, stacked boxes contained what appeared to be supplies. "Oh my God," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. He approached one of the tables, examining the scattered papers. They were detailed blueprints of buildings he recognized from the town. The town hall, the bank, the power station. Next to the blueprints were notes in a hurried handwriting, detailing schedules, routes, and weak points? Jack's stomach churned as the reality of the situation began to take shape in his mind. This wasn't a scientific expedition or a mining project. This looked like a plan for something terrible. He picked up one of the maps, noticing red markings at several points in the town. Each mark was accompanied by cryptic notes. Point A, maximum impact. Point B, evacuation hindered. Jack felt the blood freeze in his veins. Max, who had been sniffing around the chamber, suddenly let out a low growl. Jack turned quickly, almost knocking over a pile of papers. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, fear evident in his voice. The Labrador was staring intently at a dark corner of the chamber. Jack pointed the flashlight in that direction and nearly screamed. Hidden in the shadows was a metal door, a door that looked heavy, old, but with a modern electronic security system installed. Jack approached cautiously, examining the panel next to the door. It was a fingerprint recognition system, something far too advanced to be in the middle of a cave. "What are they hiding in there?" he murmured to himself. As he contemplated his options, a soft beep caught his attention. It was his phone, warning that the battery was low. Jack looked at the screen. Only 15%. Battery left, and of course, no signal down here in the cave. The reality of his situation began to weigh on him. He was alone, well, with Max, in an unknown cave, having discovered what seemed to be the base of operations for some sort of attack on the town. And now, with the battery running out, he risked being trapped in the dark. "We need to get out of here, Max," Jack said, his voice trembling slightly. "We have to warn someone about this." But when he turned to leave, Max didn't move. The dog was staring intently at the metal door, letting out a low, anguished whine. "Come on, boy," Jack insisted, tugging lightly on Max's collar. But the Labrador resisted, planting his paws firmly on the ground. Frustrated and increasingly anxious, Jack was about to pick up Max when he heard it. A distant sound, coming from the direction they had entered. Voices and footsteps approaching. Panic seized Jack. He looked around frantically, searching for a place to hide. The voices were getting louder, clearer. There were two people, maybe three, talking in low, serious tones. With his heart racing, Jack pulled Max behind a pile of boxes in the darkest corner of the chamber. He turned off the flashlight, plunging them into almost total darkness. Only a faint light from the tunnel illuminated the chamber entrance. The voices were now at the entrance. Jack held his breath, one hand firmly on Max's muzzle to keep him quiet. And then, the first clear words reached his ears. "Are you sure no one followed us?" "Positive. The cave entrance is still well hidden. No one suspects a thing." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. He recognized that voice. It was a voice he had heard since childhood, a voice that represented safety and trust. It was the voice of his Uncle Richard. The chamber lights suddenly turned on, momentarily blinding Jack. He blinked, trying to adjust his vision, his heart beating so hard he feared it might be heard. When his vision cleared, he saw three figures entering the chamber. Two he didn't recognize, serious-looking professional men. But the third was undoubtedly his Uncle Richard, the respected businessman of the town, the man Jack had always seen as a second father. "Let's go over the plan one last time," Richard said, his voice cold and determined. "In 3 days, this town will change forever, and we will be the architects of that change." Jack felt like the world was crumbling around him. His uncle, the man he admired so much, was at the center of a plan that seemed to threaten the entire town. Questions piled up in his mind. Why? How? What exactly were they planning? As the men moved around the chamber, discussing details of their sinister plan, Jack realized he was trapped. Trapped between the duty to protect his town and the loyalty to his family. And with every word he heard, he understood that the decision he made in the next few moments would change everything. Forever. Jack remained still, his body tense and his breathing shallow, as he watched his Uncle Richard and the two unknown men move around the chamber. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and he could feel Max's heart beating rapidly against his leg. "The device is ready?" Richard's voice echoed in the cave. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, responded, "Yes, sir. It's behind the security door as requested. No one but us has access." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Device? What kind of device needed that much security? Richard approached one of the maps on the wall. "Excellent. Now let's go over the key points. First, the power station." The other man, shorter with graying hair, pointed to a marking on the map. "At 2 p.m., we'll cut power to the entire town. This will cause chaos and panic, distracting the authorities." "Perfect," Richard smiled, a sinister gleam in his eyes. "Next, the central bank. At 2:30 p.m., with the security systems compromised by the blackout, we'll have free access to the vaults," the tall man continued. "We estimate about 50 million in cash and assets." Jack felt his stomach churn. This wasn't just an attack. It was a massive heist. Richard turned, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. For a terrible moment, Jack thought he had been discovered, but his uncle's gaze passed right over his hiding spot. "And finally, at 3 p.m. we activate the device," Richard said, his voice filled with an emotion Jack had never heard before. "The panic caused by the blackout and the robbery will be nothing compared to what comes next." The other two men exchanged nervous glances. "Sir," the gray-haired man began hesitantly, "are you sure about this part of the plan? The impact will be irreversible," Richard completed, a cold smile on his lips. "Precisely. This town took everything from me. Now I'm returning the favor." Jack felt like he had been punched in the gut. His uncle, the man he admired so much, was planning to destroy the entire town. But why? What had the town done to him? At that moment, Max moved, making a nearly imperceptible sound. Jack froze, his heart seeming to stop for a second. Richard stopped talking, tilting his head. "Did you hear that?" The two men went on alert, looking around the chamber. Jack held Max tighter, praying that the dog would stay quiet. "Must be just the wind in the caves," the tall man said after a few tense moments of silence. Richard didn't seem convinced, but continued. "Right. Let's check the device one last time before we leave." He walked to the metal door, placing his thumb on the biometric scanner. With a soft beep, the door opened, revealing a small room filled with electronic equipment. Jack knew this was his chance. As the three men entered the secret room, he silently slipped out of his hiding spot, pulling Max with him. With his heart in his throat, he quickly moved toward the chamber exit. But Max had other plans. The Labrador suddenly broke free from Jack's grip and ran toward the secret room, barking loudly. "Max, no!" Jack shouted, forgetting momentarily about his situation. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Richard and the two men turned, their faces a mix of shock and anger. Jack saw the recognition in his uncle's eyes, followed by something he had never seen before, a cold, calculated hatred. "Jack?" Richard said, his voice dangerously calm. What an unpleasant surprise. Jack froze, torn between running and confronting his uncle. "Uncle Richard, what's going on? Why are you doing this?" Richard laughed, a humorless sound. "Oh, my dear nephew. Always so curious, always wanting to be the hero. Let me tell you a story since you've come so far to hear it." He gestured to the other two men, who quickly blocked the chamber exit. Jack realized he was trapped. "This town," Richard continued, his voice filled with bitterness, "took everything from me. My wife, your aunt, died because of the local hospital's negligence. My company went bankrupt when the mayor changed the zoning laws, favoring my competitors. And when I tried to rebuild, I was ridiculed and ostracized." Jack shook his head, incredulous. "But that doesn't justify destroying an entire town. There are innocent people here, children." "Innocent?" Richard sneered. "No one is innocent. Everyone is complicit, whether by action or omission, and now they will all pay." Max growled low, sensing the tension in the air. Jack placed a protective hand on the dog, his mind racing to find a way out. "And you, Jack," Richard continued, stepping closer. "My dear nephew, I always thought you would understand, that you would stand by me when the time came. But I see now that I was mistaken." Jack felt a chill run down his spine at his uncle's tone. "I can't let you do this, Uncle Richard. No matter what happened, this is wrong." Richard sighed, as if disappointed with a stubborn child. "Ah, Jack, you've always been so much like your father. Noble, but foolish. Unfortunately, that means you are now a problem." He gestured to the two men. "Take him. He'll stay here until everything is over. After that, well, it won't matter anymore, will it?" Jack looked around frantically, searching for an escape. His gaze fell on the control panel near the metal door. It was his only chance. With a swift movement, He grabbed Max and dashed toward the panel. The men, caught by surprise, hesitated for a crucial moment. "Stop him!" Richard shouted, but it was too late. Jack slammed his fist into the panel with all his strength, sending sparks flying through the air. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. When the emergency lighting kicked in, Jack was already running down the tunnel, Max at his side. Behind him, he could hear his uncle's furious shouts and the sound of footsteps in pursuit. Running through the darkness, guided only by instinct and memory, Jack knew that the real battle was just beginning. He had to get out of the cave. He had to warn someone. He had to stop his uncle's plan. With his heart pounding and adrenaline pumping through his veins, Jack ran to save not just his own life, but the lives of an entire town. And as he ran, one question echoed in his mind. How could he stop the man he once considered his second father? Jack sprinted through the dark tunnels, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. Max, loyal as ever, kept pace beside him, guiding him through the darkness with his canine instincts. The shouts and footsteps of their pursuers echoed behind them, spurring them to run even faster. "Come on, Max," Jack panted, rounding a tight corner. The cool, damp air of the caves burned his lungs, but he didn't dare stop. Suddenly, a beam of light cut through the darkness. Ahead. Jack felt a wave of relief as he realized they were nearing the exit. With one last effort, he and Max burst out of the cave, blinking against the late afternoon sunlight. Without wasting any time, Jack pulled out his phone, silently thanking it for still having a signal. His hands trembled as he dialed the emergency number. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. Please listen, Jack spoke quickly, glancing nervously over his shoulder. There's a plan to attack the town. A massive robbery and something worse. It's set to start at 2:01 p.m. with a blackout at the power station. Sir, calm down. Can you give me more details? Jack took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. My name is Jack Thompson. My uncle, Richard Thompson, is planning an attack on the town. He has a dangerous device hidden in the Mount Shadow caves. Please, you need to act fast. As Jack spoke, he heard voices approaching from the cave entrance. His heart froze as he recognized his uncle's voice. Understood, Mr. Thompson. We're dispatching units to your location and the power station. Stay where you are and... Jack abruptly ended the call as he saw his uncle and the two men emerge from the cave. He quickly stowed the phone away, hoping they hadn't noticed. Jack! Richard shouted, his face twisted in rage. You have no idea what you're doing! Jack stood his ground, defensively, Max growling at his side. No, Uncle Richard, it's you who doesn't know what you're doing. This has to stop. Richard laughed bitterly. Stop? We're just getting started, my dear nephew. You think a call to the police will change anything? Jack's blood ran cold, so his uncle had noticed the call. Our plan is bigger than you can imagine, Richard continued, advancing slowly. We have people everywhere, in the police, in the government, even in the telecom companies. Your little attempt at heroism means nothing. Jack felt the weight of the situation crashing down on his shoulders. Was there really no hope? He looked at Max, who remained steadfast by his side, and found a new determination. It doesn't matter how many people you have on your side, Uncle, Jack said, his voice firm. What you're doing is wrong, and I'm going to fight it until the end. Richard sighed, almost sadly. Ah, Jack. I really hoped you would understand, that you would join us. But I see now that you're as blind as the rest of this ungrateful town. He gestured to his henchman. Take him. We'll bring him with us. Maybe once he sees our work unfold, he'll finally understand. The two men advanced toward Jack, who instinctively backed away. Max barked fiercely, placing himself between Jack and the attackers. At that moment, the sound of sirens cut through the air. red and blue. Lights began flashing on the road below, rapidly approaching. Richard cursed under his breath. Impossible! How did they get here so fast? Jack couldn't suppress a smile of relief. It seemed not everyone in the police was on his uncle's side. "It's over, Uncle Richard," Jack said. "Turn yourself in now." But Richard didn't seem ready to give up. With a swift motion, he pulled something from his pocket, a small remote control. "Over?" he laughed maniacally. "This is far from over, my dear nephew. If I can't have my revenge as planned, then let's speed things up." Richard's finger hovered over the button on the remote. Jack, realizing the danger, acted on instinct. He lunged forward, trying to reach the remote before his uncle could activate it. The two collided, falling to the ground in a tangle of arms and legs. Jack struggled to wrest the remote from his uncle's hands, while Richard fought back furiously. "Stop him!" Richard shouted to his henchmen. But they were too occupied trying to fend off Max, who was biting and barking fiercely. With one final effort, Jack managed to rip the remote from his uncle's hands. Without thinking twice, he threw it to the ground and stomped on it. Richard screamed in rage and frustration. "You have no idea what you just did." At that moment, several police cars arrived on the scene, surrounding them. Armed officers jumped out of the vehicles, aiming their weapons at Richard and his men. "Police! Hands up!" one of the officers shouted. Richard, seeing himself cornered, finally seemed to collapse. His shoulders slumped, and he raised his hands in surrender. His henchmen, seeing they had no choice, followed suit. Jack watched, stunned, as the police handcuffed his uncle and the other men. Max returned to his side, wagging his tail as if he knew they had won. One of the officers approached Jack. "Are you Jack Thompson? We got your call. Good job, son. You saved a lot of lives today." Jack nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. He looked at his uncle, being placed in the police car. Their eyes met for a moment, and Jack saw something he never expected to see in Richard's eyes: regret. In the hours that followed, Jack was taken to the police station to give a statement. He recounted everything he knew about his uncle's plan, from the accidental discovery in the cave to the final confrontation. The police acted quickly on the information Jack provided. The device in the cave was found and disarmed by a specialized team. Several accomplices were arrested across the town, including some corrupt officials and government employees. As the sun set, Jack was finally released to go home. He walked slowly through the town streets, Max trotting faithfully beside him. The people around him went about their lives, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Jack sat down on a park bench, physically and emotionally exhausted. Max lay at his feet, looking up at him with understanding eyes. "We did the right thing, didn't we, buddy?" Jack murmured, stroking Max's head. As he watched families in the park, children laughing and playing, Jack felt a mix of relief and sadness. He had saved the town, but at what cost? His uncle, the man he admired so much, now faced a long prison sentence. But as he saw life continuing around him, Jack realized he had made the right choice. Sometimes, doing the right thing means facing those we love, no matter how painful it is. With a sigh, Jack stood up. It was time to go home and face whatever the future held. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but with Max by his side and the certainty that he had done the right thing, he felt ready to face any challenge. As he walked home under the starry sky, Jack reflected on how an ordinary day can turn into something extraordinary, and how the choices we make can change not only our lives, but the lives of everyone around us. Dear listeners, Jack's story reminds us that life often puts us in difficult situations where we must choose between what is easy and what is right. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to those we love, or going against what is expected of us. But it's these choices that define who we are and the impact we have on the world. Reflect. What would you do if you were in Jack's place? How would you handle discovering that someone you love is about to do something terrible? These are questions that make us think about our own morals and values. If you enjoyed this story and want to explore more ethical dilemmas and thrilling adventures, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Every story we share here is an opportunity for us to grow together, to question our beliefs, and to inspire each other to be the best versions of ourselves. Remember, by subscribing to the channel, you're not just getting more stories, you're joining a community of people who, like you, seek to better understand the world and their place in it. So, what are you waiting for? Join us on this journey of self-discovery and personal growth. Until the next story.